Hello there, I'm Ryan McElhaney with Mac Be Buzzin'. Thanks for watching. Today, I thought we would talk about swarm traps, and in particular, how to build swarm traps without spending a lot of money. Because who doesn't like free bees?
Yeah.
Hello there. Today is early February, and when we can't get out in the bee yard to do some of the more fun things with actually keeping live bees, that means that there are other chores that we take care of to entertain ourselves as beekeepers this time of year. And one of those things is we know that swarm season is right around the corner. So coming up in March and April, April in particular is kind of the prime time when bees are really building up in the area. So how do we get free bees? Well, that means finding good places to set up swarm traps. And you'll see a variety of different approaches for building swarm traps. A lot of times though, what you'll typically see is this recommendation that swarm traps need to be anywhere between 40 and 60 liters to be optimal. A 10 frame deep hive body is about 43 liters. So if you're in the neighborhood of about the size of an actual deep hive body, then that's typically a pretty good size for a swarm trap. But here's the thing. The whole point of catching swarms most of the time is to save money. And so if I have to go out and try and get some equipment, especially if equipment is a premium for me in my bee operation, then it's not really cost effective for me to be spending money to get those supplies. So the real question is, what do you really need to catch swarms? And the simple reality is we see bees set up home in a lot of different places, some of which don't necessarily seem optimal. For example, in our area, it is not uncommon to see bees decide to take up residence in those little water meter boxes or water control boxes by the road. The opening's at the top, so rain can get in if it wants to, but yet they'll still build in there. And typically those compartments are fairly small. I mean, we see bees all the time in weird places, even like if you've ever seen a terracotta pot that's turned upside down and there's a little hole somewhere in that terracotta pot, and bees will actually build comb inside of there. So bees aren't particularly picky depending on the size of the swarm. The reality is bees, when they're looking for a place to set up shop, are looking for a place that they know they can actually build comb pretty easily from the top. They want it to be dry and they want it to be easy to protect. If your goal is to capture a really strong swarm, one that you could put in a box, give it some frames, expect that in a couple of weeks it's already going to be building things out and perhaps hitting the honey flow, then you definitely want to have a bigger swarm trap, one that is going to attract a larger swarm. If the goal is just to catch bees, and if you're comfortable with giving a little bit of time for, say, a nuke box size of a swarm to grow into what it needs to be, then the reality is you have a lot more options. So for me, that's really the goal. So here are a few options or ideas. We'll start with some of the more involved, and then we'll get into some of the more super simple. So first of all, the most involved swarm trap that I have is this girl right here. So you can see we have a deep hive body. Down here on the bottom, you can actually see it looks like it might be a bottom board, but it's actually not. These are some old Varroa screens that honestly I don't really have a whole lot of use for, but I got them in some old used equipment. So it's like I may as well use them for something, right? But because they're not contained down below, I didn't want something that if it's going to be hanging in a tree is going to have too much airflow underneath, because I don't think the bees would really want to come in and build a colony. So this is just insulation board. I just cut some down to size and just press fitted in this little opening down here because it was about a 3/4 inch opening right there to close it off. So you can see, just gives me a standard wide opening right there on a deep hive body. This lid is another thing that I got basically for free. I got some used equipment and they had these old kind of janky plastic covers. I'm not really going to use this for much of anything, so I thought that'd be great to put on a swarm trap. Additionally, inside of there, I basically just have wood. The main purpose of having, and this one has a screen on it, which isn't the most ideal, it still works fine. My other one that's still assembled over there is just solid wood. But the main thing is you want bees to feel like they have a place that they can actually start building comb off the top of. Then you can see inside, No real frills. I am gonna stick one more frame in here, just for good measure. But inside, this is just an old, gnarly frame of comb that had wax moth damage on it. It's a good use for them because it definitely smells like bees, which is one of the most important things with swarm traps. That actually leads to probably one of the most important details in making this video. So while sizes are certainly optional depending on what size of swarm you're wanting to actually be catching, the reality is the fundamentals outside of the cavity space itself and being attractive to bees is bees like to smell other bees. So one of the most important things that you can do is make sure that you've got some sort of old comb, old frames. I'll use, like this is an old piece of comb from a cutout. And so I'll put this sort of thing in there, or better yet, I'll use this to actually smear the inside of the box so I don't have a whole bunch of detritus and old stuff inside my boxes. But I'll use this to kind of paint the inside of the boxes. All I typically will do is take this with a little bit of a torch, warm it, and then basically just smear it on the inside of my boxes. And it doesn't really matter what type of swarm trap that I'm using. Additionally, you'll want some sort of a lure. Now you can use lemongrass oil. You can also buy Swarm Commander. This is what I tend to use. Typically, I'll just take this, I'll spritz a little bit on some cotton swabs, put the cotton swab in a little plastic bag, and then I'll just toss the plastic bag into the actual swarm trap that I'm using. I'll also take a little bit of this on that cotton swab before I do that and just smear kind of right around the entrance and right along one of the frames on the inside of the box. You want bees to come in and smell a combination of that kind of lemongrass smell along with propolis and wax. Those are the things that I found that pretty instantaneously start attracting the attention of scout bees. All right, so that's my most involved swarm trap that I use. Stepping down a little bit from that, of course you want to use any gear that you have. But right here, this is just an old nuke box that I have. Again, I got this in kind of some used equipment that I happened into. It's just got a hole there right on the front with a little disc that can close, which does make it easy for transport. But you can see here, it's one of those that has like a hole in the lid, which I don't tend to use a whole lot. So I just kind of sealed that up because I didn't want water to be able to get into it. Nothing fancy. And then again, it's just an old nuke. Now this one does actually have a screen bottom, which I'm just gonna put something solid underneath it. I'll probably just set it on a piece of plywood before I go mounting this somewhere. But once again, most important thing, so this is just an old gnarly frame, definitely smells like bees. And then this one right here, man, this was really an old gnarly frame with some comb. Not mine, this was again in some used equipment that I happened into. Didn't want this in my operation, so why not use it in a swarm trap? It's free, right? You can see here though, it's not the optimal size, but if you're comfortable with just starting with a small nuke size colony, there's nothing wrong with starting with one of those, and you will absolutely catch swarms with it. All right, so now let's start getting to a few more of those true DIY type of swarm traps. First of all, I'm sure pretty much everybody has a few 5-gallon buckets lying around the house, right? These actually make surprisingly effective swarm traps. Now you can see it's not the biggest by volume. Size-wise, you're probably looking at about the same as an actual nuke box, maybe just a little bit bigger. But I've actually caught a number of swarms using these. And it's a pretty simple process. So these buckets at any home improvement store, they're probably about $8 each. So the price of an $8 swarm trap. So let me show you what I've done with these. So on the inside, first of all, we've got our lid. You can see here, there's actually comb that's built here because I caught a swarm with it this season. So they built from the lid. Definitely smells like bees now, but before that, I just smeared the inside of this with some old beeswax that I had, or a block of wax that you can actually buy. So wanted to make sure that the lid smelled that way. You can also see in here, clearly this bucket has been used because it was a previous bee home. Same thing around the outside. I took beeswax and I actually just painted the outside of the bucket with wax. And then I did the same thing with a little bit of propolis. And then on the front of it, you can see here, I just drilled a small hole Now, if I was going back and doing this again, I would actually probably move the hole down to about right here because of how I have the actual bucket set up. But this did work fine for me, and the bees did choose it even with the location of the hole. Now, the reason I mentioned that on the bucket size is bees have a tendency to like to go in and then go up. So if you let them go in and go up, they'll start building that comb, but they like to travel a little bit. And even if you were to put, like in one of those other types of swarm traps, if you were to put frames in, let's say that you put a full row of frames, if you were going to do like a deep over a medium and use that as your swarm trap, the bees still like, for whatever reason, to have that extra cavity down below of space that they feel like they could grow into. Now that's not relevant necessarily in this one, but this one they came in and they got right to work building comb actually on that top lid. A lot of times you'll see that people will actually use buckets for swarm traps and they'll build them this way with the intent of actually hanging this in a tree. And the main reason they do that is it's pretty easy to put a hole here or to put some sort of a slit on this side that then you can just ratchet strap to a tree. I do like that idea, but in my situation, sometimes I find that I won't be able to get to a swarm trap right away, and bees can build comb pretty quickly. What I didn't like with the curvature of this is that if bees start building comb here, following that curve, it's a little more awkward to remove that comb after the fact. If I've got it this way, and they're building on this, then when it's time for me to take them, if I haven't gotten to this in time, I can legit open the lid, flip it over, and then actually do a removal from the comb that's here and move them into a hive body. If you want to see a video of this actually in action, I do have one on my channel and I'll link it right above. All right, the way that this is typically mounted is I'll find a nice fork in a tree, because again, I'm not trying to do anything complicated. So I'll just find a nice fork in a tree that has pretty good sun exposure, and I'll put this up there. And then often I'll just use the handle of the bucket with a couple of zip ties and I'll just zip tie it in place. So this has worked really well for me, super cheap. All right, next up, another DIY option. Why not upcycle, right? So sometimes you'll see things on Facebook Marketplace that you go, I bet I could do something in beekeeping with that. I'm not really sure what. Well, this definitely falls into one of those categories. So I've got a couple of sizes of these here. These are just old foam coolers, and those have a very practical purpose if you're looking to catch bees. First of all, I'm going to show you this one. So this is kind of a standard size. You can probably tell from this that size-wise, it's about roughly the same size as a 10-frame deep hive body. It's maybe just a tiny bit smaller, but not much, and it's about the same depth. Now, I've actually seen some people use these as a substitute actual deep hive body for an actual colony. They'll take these and they'll do basically wooden skewers across the top and treat it a little bit like a lay-ins hive. Now, I didn't do that, but I did take some inspiration from that. So, if we open this up, you'll see once again consistently, you'll see the inside of this has been smeared up pretty well with a combination of wax and propolis. Again, using that same old piece of comb that I basically melted and then smeared all over. But inside, what I chose to do instead, so you can see we've got a hole right there. Simple, I just poke that hole with a little file and just kind of open it up to a little circle, and then smeared the outside again. But if you look at the inside, notice I mentioned the skewers when people use these as a deep hive body substitute. Well, in this case, I didn't have any more frames that I wanted to use. And so I thought, well, I need something to give the bees an easy point to be able to start building comb. So my thought process was, how about I treat it like a lay-ins hive and we'll give them some top bars to build from. So these right here, you can typically get about 3 of them from, these are square dowels that you can get at a home improvement store for about $1.50. And so I basically just took that, cut 3 down. This is another one that I had from another dowel. So for about $2 in the actual wood and for free for the actual styrofoam frame here, basically I made a swarm trap. So the reason that I put these is ideally I don't really want the bees building on this styrofoam lid Because it's styrofoam, this will have a tendency to wear out a little bit more. You will get the bees chewing on some things if you leave them in here for any amount of time. So it's not really a good permanent location for them because of that ability or tendency for them to choose. However, in this situation, it's a swarm trap. We're not planning to leave bees in there super long, but I wanted to give them a good place to actually build some comb. The other thing is these skewers are just press fit in. Because this is somewhat pliable and I can pull on it, the reality is I can pull this out. So if the bees actually build on these, it's pretty easy then for me to come back in and pull those out with the comb. Cut the comb cleanly off and then drop them into some other woodenware that I already have. So that gives them a place to build. This seals off nice and tight. No water's gonna get in there. The other thing that I will typically do, just in case of wind, is I run a little bit of duct tape right around the lid right there. The other thing I like about these is because they're so light, the only real weight that's gonna be in these is the actual bees when they choose to land in it. All right, next up. I've got two of these right here. Now this, just like that last one, this is coolers. But one thing that I do wanna compare, so you'll notice in terms of volume here, there's a lot of similarity overall in volume. The only difference is, whereas this one's set up a bit more like a deep hive body, the other is set up a bit more as if you had a couple of 5-frame Nucs. So this one, basically what I did is I had a couple, this is a couple of those styrofoam coolers. So this one down here, they're already designed to stack. So I came through with just a pocket knife and I cut the lip off of the bottom one. Then I took the top one and I went on the inside and I actually cut the bottom out of it. So if you can see all the way down. So I cut the bottom out of this one right here. I hot glued them together and then just for good measure, just sealed it off with a little bit of duct tape around the outside as well. You can see once again, smearing the inside with a combination of that wax and propolis. And I use that same sort of a skewer idea up here as well. This one I like actually a little bit better because it allows room for the bees to come in, travel up, start building the comb up in the top, and it still gives them plenty of vertical space. This, for whatever reason, even in terms of keeping resource Nucs in the operation, bees really like to build comb in a vertical space like this with a 5/5 much more efficiently than even necessarily building a 10-frame hive body all the way across. So I really like this structure, and I don't need a whole lot up here because I've got those few skewers and it gives them plenty of space. If the bees do decide to build inside of that lid, it's not gonna hurt anything, but ideally, because they've got 3 places to actually start building, they shouldn't need to do that to begin with. And by the time that you find them, I mean, you shouldn't have enough comb to fill up this bucket. If it is, you're not really checking your swarm traps very often. But once we're done, once again, the lid just press fits really nice right there. Just a little bit of duct tape and another ratchet strap sort of a thing to put this up. So a few other instances that you'll see people do, and these all work perfectly fine. Again, it's just a matter of baiting them and getting them into places that work well for bees. But you see this right here. So this is just a Nuc box. I'm not a fan of these. Most beekeepers in my area aren't fans of these because in Texas heat in particular, they'll tend to overheat pretty quickly. But if you're talking about just a swarm trap, it's in the shade of a tree and you're planning to come pick it up as soon as it actually has bees move in, reality is these things work great. I mean, you can take that right there, set the opening how you want it, bait it, and that'll work great for getting bees. Sometimes you'll even have something like this around. One of these by itself, I wouldn't say is really big enough to catch much of any swarm, although it is roughly the size of one of those water control boxes that we were talking about. However, if you take a couple of these, you can put these together and basically make a mock skep, for lack of a better term. And you just need a little bit of hot glue or some duct tape, and you can actually connect these together as a single piece. They've already got holes. I mean, keep the hole that's already there, seal up the rest of them, Make sure that you bait the inside like you would in any other normal circumstance, and then run a couple of zip ties through it, and you can set this up in a tree pretty easily. So I see people use these kind of swarm traps with quite a bit of effectiveness. Lord knows I got plenty of these sitting around. And then last but not least, as we're talking about just being creative with what you have, any cat owners out there, you ever buy kitty litter? But this thing is tailor-made. It's basically the size of a nuke box. I mean, you can turn these into a swarm trap pretty easily. If I was using it, I would probably go sideways like this and have this be your entrance, because then you can mount it pretty easily this way, wherever you're gonna put it. But it's basically a self-made swarm trap. Just come in, bait it, make sure it's got the smells, and it's pretty easy to take the bees out when you're done. As you can see, I mean, you have options. You just need to decide, how big of a swarm am I interested in catching? Outside of that, the only real requirements are that you have something that's dark, that's dry, that's easy to protect, and that smells like bees. The most important of those things is smelling like bees. So find yourself some old combs, some old frames, get yourself some Swarm Commander or some other similar product, or go down to your local health food store and find yourself some, make sure it's actual lemongrass oil, but find yourself some lemongrass oil, put a little bit on some cotton swabs. So find easy, convenient places to put them up, check them regularly, and then wash, rinse, repeat. You'd be amazed how many swarms you'll catch in a season if you get a half dozen to a dozen of these out there.